Marcus Thompson had always been different from the other royal guards. While his colleagues stood tall and broad-shouldered like ancient oak trees, Marcus appeared more like a young sapling that hadn't quite found its strength yet. At 22 years old, he was the youngest member of the elite Royal Protection Unit, and, unfortunately, he looked it. Every morning, Marcus would arrive at the palace barracks 30 minutes early, hoping to avoid the sneering looks and whispered comments from his fellow guards. But, no matter how early he came, someone was always there to remind him that he didn't belong among the kingdom's finest protectors. "Look who's here," called out Derek Harrison, a massive guard with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could wake the dead. "Little Marcus, ready to play dress-up again?" The other guards laughed as Marcus quietly hung up his civilian clothes and began putting on his ceremonial uniform. The red jacket with its golden braiding always felt too big on his slim frame, and the tall black hat seemed to dwarf his narrow face. He had requested a smaller size months ago, but somehow the quartermaster never seemed to have time to order it. "I heard Captain Williams is thinking of transferring you to gate duty," said another guard named Peterson, his voice dripping with false concern. "You know, where you won't have to worry about actually protecting anyone important." Marcus said nothing as he adjusted his sword belt. He had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. Instead, he focused on the one thing that gave him confidence: the precision rifle that hung on the wall above his locker. While the other guards preferred their ceremonial swords and traditional weapons, Marcus had shown an unusual talent with long-range firearms during training. But even this skill was mocked by his peers. "What's the point of being a good shot if you can't even lift a grown man off the ground?" Derek would often say, "What happens when someone gets past your little pop gun?" The truth was, Marcus had been asking himself the same question for months. He had scored the highest marks in marksmanship training in the Academy's history, but physical combat remained his weakness. While other recruits could bench press twice their body weight, Marcus struggled to complete the basic strength requirements. Captain Williams, a stern woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes like winter ice, had taken a chance on Marcus despite his physical limitations. She saw something in his shooting scores that others missed, not just accuracy, but an almost supernatural ability to read wind, distance, and timing. However, even her support had limits. "Thompson," she called out as Marcus finished suiting up. "My office. Now." The other guards exchanged knowing looks as Marcus followed the captain down the long stone corridor. Her office was a small room lined with commendations and photographs from her 30 years of service. Behind her desk hung a painting of the royal family: King Edward, Queen Isabella, and their teenage daughter Princess Catherine. "Sit down, Marcus," Captain Williams said, her tone softer than usual. This worried him more than if she had been shouting. Marcus perched on the edge of the chair, his back straight despite his nervousness. "Yes, ma'am. I've been reviewing the unit evaluations," she began, shuffling through a stack of papers. "Your marksmanship scores continue to be exceptional. In fact, you've improved even since joining the unit. Your precision is unlike anything I've seen in 3 decades of service." Marcus felt a small flicker of hope, but the captain's expression remained serious. "However," she continued, "your physical combat assessments are concerning. Last week's hand-to-hand exercise was disappointing." Marcus winced, remembering how Derek had easily overpowered him in front of the entire unit. It hadn't even been close. One moment, he was attempting a defensive move. The next, he was flat on his back with Derek's boot on his chest. The Royal Guard isn't just about ceremony and tradition, Marcus. We're the last line of defense for the royal family. Every member of this unit must be capable of protecting them against any threat, whether it's an assassin with a knife or a coordinated attack by multiple enemies. "Understand, ma'am," Marcus said quietly. "I've been working on my strength training every evening after duties." Captain Williams leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "I know you have. Sergeant Martinez tells me you're often in the gym until midnight. But improvement takes time, and I'm not sure we have that luxury." She pulled out a manila folder and opened it on her desk. "There's been chatter from our intelligence network. Nothing concrete, but enough to put us on high alert. The annual Harvest Festival is next week, and the royal family will be making their traditional public appearance. It's always a security nightmare. Thousands of people, multiple buildings to secure, countless sight lines to monitor. Marcus nodded. The Harvest Festival was one of the kingdom's oldest traditions. For over 200 years, the royal family had appeared on the great balcony of the palace to address the gathered crowds and officially begin the celebration. It was also considered one of the most dangerous days of the year for the Royal Guard. I need every member of this unit to be operating at peak efficiency, Captain Williams continued. I can't afford to have someone who might become a liability in a crisis situation. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Are you removing me from the unit, ma'am? Captain Williams was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming on the desk. Not yet. But, Marcus, I need you to understand something. Your marksmanship skills are valuable, but they're not enough on their own. A royal guard must be able to adapt to any situation, fight in any environment, protect the family through any means necessary. What can I do to prove myself? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Show me that you can handle yourself in a real situation. Not a training exercise, not a practice scenario, but something that matters. Show me that despite your size, you could be the protector this unit needs. Marcus stood up, his mind racing. I won't let you down, ma'am. I hope not, Marcus. I really do. As Marcus left the captain's office, he felt the weight of every eye in the barracks following him. Word would spread quickly about his meeting with the captain. By dinner time, everyone would know that little Marcus Thompson was on thin ice. That evening, as was his routine, Marcus made his way to the shooting range in the basement of the palace. The range was deserted at this hour, which was exactly how he preferred it. Here, away from the mocking voices and judgmental stares, he could focus on the one thing he truly excelled at. Marcus selected his preferred rifle, a modern precision weapon that the Royal Guard used for long-range protection duties. It wasn't the fanciest gun in the armory, but it was perfectly balanced and incredibly accurate in the right hands. Most importantly, it felt natural to him in a way that swords and hand-to-hand combat never would. He set up targets at various distances, starting at 200 yards and extending out to 800. Most guards could hit a target consistently at 200 yards. Good marksmen could manage 400. Marcus regularly practiced at distances that would challenge military snipers. As he settled into his shooting position, lying prone on the padded mat, the chaos of his daily life seemed to fade away. The mocking voices, the doubting looks, the constant pressure, all of it disappeared when he looked through the scope. Here, in this moment, he wasn't the smallest guard or the weakest fighter. He was simply a man with a rifle, and he was very, very good at what he did. The first shot rang out, echoing in the enclosed space. Through his scope, Marcus could see the perfect hole appearing in the center of the target's bullseye. He worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round, and fired again. Another perfect hit, so close to the first that they almost overlapped. For the next hour, Marcus methodically worked through his routine. Different distances, different positions, different environmental factors simulated by adjusting the range's air circulation system. With each shot, his confidence grew a little more. This was who he was. This was what he could contribute to the Royal Guard. But as he packed up his equipment and prepared to leave, Marcus couldn't shake Captain Williams' words. Marksmanship wasn't enough. He needed to prove himself in a real situation, show that he could protect the royal family when it mattered most. The Harvest Festival was 6 days away. 6 days to somehow demonstrate that Marcus Thompson, despite being the smallest and weakest member of the Royal Guard, deserved to wear the uniform and protect the kingdom's most important family. As Marcus walked through the empty corridors back to his quarters, he passed the portrait gallery where paintings of former royal guards lined the walls. These were the heroes of past generations, men and women who had given their lives to protect the crown, who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. Their painted eyes seemed to watch him as he passed, and Marcus wondered if he would ever be worthy of joining their ranks. In his small room, Marcus sat on his narrow bed and opened his training manual. He had read it cover to cover dozens of times, but tonight he studied it with new intensity. Somewhere in these pages, in these tactics and strategies, there had to be a way for someone like him to make a difference. The manual was full of stories about royal guards who had saved the day through courage, strength, and quick thinking. There was Lieutenant Sarah Crawford, who had single-handedly fought off 6 assassins in the palace gardens 30 years ago. Sergeant Major Robert Hayes had thrown himself in front of a bomb intended for the king, saving dozens of lives at the cost of his own. All of them had been physically imposing, naturally gifted warriors who could overpower any enemy through sheer force. None of them sounded like Marcus. But as he continued reading, Marcus came across a story he had overlooked before. It was just a small paragraph about a guard named Private Michael Chun, who had served during the reign of King Edward's grandfather. Chun had been described as small in stature, but precise in action, and had prevented a catastrophe through exceptional observational skills and marksmanship. The details were frustratingly vague, but it was the first time Marcus had read about a royal guard who sounded anything like himself. Private Chun had found a way to serve effectively despite not being a physical powerhouse. If he could do it, maybe Marcus could too. That night, Marcus dreamed of the Harvest Festival. In his dream, he stood on the palace battlements, rifle in hand, watching over the crowds below. The royal family appeared on their balcony to address the people, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. But instead of fear or inadequacy, he felt a strange, calm confidence. When he woke up the next morning, Marcus realized something had changed. He was still the smallest member of the royal guard, still the target of his colleagues' mockery, still on the verge of losing his position. But for the first time since joining the unit, he had a clear sense of what he needed to do. The Harvest Festival was 5 days away, and Marcus Thompson was going to prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes were exactly what the situation required. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into preparation with an intensity that surprised even him. While the other guards went through their standard routines, Marcus studied every inch of the palace grounds, memorized every sight line and potential threat position, and practiced shooting from every possible angle and location. He spent hours on the palace rooftops, identifying all the buildings and windows that could potentially harbor a sniper. He timed the routes between different positions, calculated fields of fire, and planned contingencies for every scenario he could imagine. The other guards noticed his increased activity, but dismissed it as desperation from someone who knew his time was running out. "Little Marcus is really trying hard," Derek commented to his friends. "Too bad trying hard doesn't make you any bigger or stronger." But Captain Williams noticed too, and she began to watch Marcus with growing interest. There was something different about his approach, something more focused and strategic than she had seen from him before. On the morning of the Harvest Festival, as the Royal Guard prepared for one of their most challenging assignments of the year, Marcus felt ready in a way he had never experienced before. He still didn't know exactly what would happen or how he would prove himself, but he was certain that when the moment came, he would be prepared for it. The crowds were already gathering in the great square below the palace, and the royal family was preparing for their traditional appearance. Somewhere out there, Marcus was convinced a threat was waiting, and when it revealed itself, the smallest member of the Royal Guard would be ready to respond. The morning of the Harvest Festival dawned crisp and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the palace windows and casting long shadows across the ancient stone floors. Marcus had been awake since 4 in the morning, running through final preparations and equipment checks. His rifle was cleaned and calibrated to perfection, his gear organized with military precision, and his mind focused on the day ahead. The great square below the palace was already filling with people despite the early hour. Families with children, elderly couples, young lovers, merchants, farmers, and nobles. Thousands of citizens had come to witness the traditional royal address that marked the beginning of the Harvest Festival. The atmosphere was festive and joyful, but Marcus knew that large crowds always presented security challenges. In the Royal Guard briefing room, Captain Williams stood before a detailed map of the palace grounds and surrounding area. Red pins marked security checkpoints, blue pins showed guard positions, and yellow pins indicated potential threat zones. The room was packed with guards, palace security personnel, and intelligence officers. "Listen carefully," Captain Williams began, her voice cutting through the morning chatter. "We have credible intelligence suggesting that there may be a threat to the royal family today. Nothing specific, but enough to put us on high alert." A murmur of concern rippled through the room. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but also noticed a strange sense of anticipation. This was what he had been preparing for. "The royal family will appear on the main balcony at precisely noon," the captain continued. "King Edward will deliver the traditional address. Queen Isabella and Princess Catherine will participate in the blessing ceremony, and they will remain visible to the public for approximately 15 minutes. She pointed to various locations on the map as she spoke. Perimeter security is being handled by palace security and local police. Our job is close protection and overwatch. Team Alpha will be positioned directly behind the royal family on the balcony. Team Beta will secure the interior approach routes. Team Gamma will provide sniper overwatch from the bell tower and north wing." Marcus listened intently, hoping to be assigned to one of the overwatch positions where his marksmanship skills would be most valuable. But when Captain Williams began reading out assignments, his name wasn't called for any of the primary teams. "Thompson," she said finally, "you'll be on roving patrol. Monitor the crowd, watch for suspicious activity, and maintain radio contact with all teams." Marcus felt his heart sink. Roving patrol was essentially crowd control, important work, but not the kind of assignment that would allow him to demonstrate his unique abilities. It was the kind of job given to junior guards and those who couldn't be trusted with more critical responsibilities. Derek Harrison smirked from across the room. Perfect assignment for little Marcus. Walking around, looking busy, trying not to get stepped on by the crowd. Several other guards chuckled, but Captain Williams silenced them with a sharp look. "Every position is critical today. I expect maximum professionalism from everyone." As the briefing concluded and guards began collecting their equipment, Marcus approached Captain Williams. "Ma'am, I was wondering if I might be more useful in one of the overwatch positions." "My marksmanship scores." "Thompson," she interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "Your assignment is roving patrol. I need someone reliable watching the crowd, and I trust you to notice details that others might miss." Marcus wanted to argue, to explain that his skills would be wasted on crowd duty, but he could see in the captain's expression that the decision was final. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." "Good. And Marcus," she added as he turned to leave, "stay alert out there. Sometimes the most important observations come from unexpected places." 2 hours later, Marcus stood at the edge of the Great Square, watching as thousands of people continued to pour into the area. The festival atmosphere was infectious. Children laughed and played, musicians performed on street corners, and vendors sold traditional harvest treats. But Marcus was focused on spotting anything unusual or threatening. His radio crackled with routine check-ins from the various security teams. Everything was proceeding normally, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't anything specific he could point to, just an instinct developed through months of training and observation. He moved slowly through the crowd, his eyes constantly scanning faces, looking for nervous behavior, unusual clothing, or anything that seemed out of place. Most people were clearly local families enjoying the festival, but Marcus noticed several individuals who didn't quite fit the pattern. There was a man in expensive clothes standing near the fountain, checking his watch frequently and looking toward the palace balcony. A woman with short dark hair kept moving through the crowd, but never seemed to settle anywhere to watch the proceedings. 3 men who appeared to be together, but were trying to look like strangers, positioned at different points around the square. Marcus keyed his radio. "Control, this is Thompson. I'm observing several individuals who might warrant closer attention. Copy, Thompson, came the reply from the Security Command Center. Describe what you're seeing. Marcus provided detailed descriptions of the suspicious individuals, including their locations and behavior patterns. The response was professional, but dismissive. We'll note your observations. Continue your patrol. As the morning progressed, Marcus continued to track the suspicious individuals. The well-dressed man had moved closer to the palace and was now positioned with a clear view of the balcony. The woman with dark hair had stopped moving randomly and was now stationed near the main entrance to the square. The three men had subtly repositioned themselves to form a triangle around the central area. But when Marcus reported these movements, the response was the same. Noted. Continue your patrol. Marcus began to realize that his observations weren't being taken seriously. As the youngest and least experienced member of the Royal Guard, his concerns were being treated as the nervous overreaction of someone trying too hard to prove himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. His attention to detail, one of his greatest strengths, was being dismissed because of his reputation as the weak link in the unit. At 11:30, the royal family appeared briefly on the balcony to test the microphones and wave to the growing crowd. Even this brief appearance drew thunderous cheers and applause. Marcus noticed that the suspicious individuals all became more alert during this test, confirming his belief that they were coordinating something. Control, this is Thompson, he radioed again. The individuals I reported earlier all showed increased attention during the royal family's test appearance. I believe they may be conducting surveillance for a planned action. Thompson, we have intelligence officers monitoring the crowd. Your job is roving patrol, not threat assessment. Stay focused on your assigned duties. Marcus felt frustration building, but forced himself to remain calm. He was running out of time to convince anyone that his observations were significant. In 20 minutes, the royal family would appear for their official address. And if Marcus was right about the threat, that's when something would happen. He decided to take a different approach. Instead of reporting through official channels, Marcus began moving closer to the suspicious individuals, trying to gather more concrete evidence of their intentions. If he could identify weapons, communication devices, or overhear planning discussions, the intelligence officers would have to take his concerns seriously. The well-dressed man was his first target. Marcus positioned himself near a pretzel vendor about 20 feet away and used the crowd movement to casually observe. Up close, he could see that the man was wearing an earpiece and occasionally touching his jacket in a way that suggested a concealed weapon. More importantly, Marcus overheard him speaking quietly into a small microphone. Target will be visible for approximately 15 minutes. Wind speed is minimal. Range is just under 400 meters. Marcus felt ice water run through his veins. These were the words of someone planning a sniper attack. 400 meters would put the shooter on one of the tall buildings surrounding the square, buildings that were supposed to have been cleared and secured. He immediately keyed his radio. Control, this is Thompson with urgent priority traffic. I have confirmation of hostile planning in progress. Repeat, confirmed hostile planning. Request immediate response. The reply came back sharp and annoyed. Thompson, you're creating unnecessary alarm. Return to your assigned patrol route immediately. Marcus stared at his radio in disbelief. Even with concrete evidence of a threat, his warnings were being ignored. He realized that his reputation as the unit's weak link had completely undermined his credibility. No one was going to listen to little Marcus Thompson, no matter what he discovered. But Marcus also realized something else. He was the only person in a position to do something about the threat. The intelligence officers were focused on their own assessments and didn't believe his reports. The other guards were in their assigned positions and wouldn't be able to respond quickly enough. If the royal family was going to be protected, it would be up to him. Marcus began moving toward the woman with dark hair, who was now positioned near what appeared to be an escape route. As he got closer, he could see that she was also wearing an earpiece and was clearly part of the same team as the well-dressed man. She was checking her watch and looking toward the clock tower apparently waiting for a specific time signal. Positions confirmed, target acquisition in 10 minutes, extraction route is clear. Now Marcus had confirmation that multiple people were involved and that the attack was scheduled to begin at noon, exactly when the royal family would appear. He also realized that at least one member of the team was positioned to help the others escape after the attack. Marcus quickly surveyed the buildings around the square, trying to determine where a sniper might be positioned. The intelligence officers had supposedly cleared all the high buildings, but Marcus knew that determined assassins could find ways around security measures. There were dozens of windows, rooftops, and balconies that could provide shooting positions. But as Marcus studied the angles and distances, one location stood out. The old clock tower on the east side of the square had been partially renovated this year, with scaffolding still in place around its upper levels. The scaffolding would provide cover for a shooter and multiple firing positions. More importantly, it was just outside the main security perimeter that had been established around the palace. Marcus keyed his radio one more time. "Control, I believe there is a sniper team positioned in or around the clock tower. The individuals I've been tracking are coordinating a planned attack time for the royal appearance. Request immediate response to the clock tower." The response was immediate and angry. "Thompson, report to the command center immediately. You are being removed from patrol duty for creating false alarms and disrupting security operations." Marcus looked toward the palace, where he could see guard preparing for the royal family's appearance. Then, toward the clock tower, where he was now certain a shooter was waiting. He looked at his watch. 5 minutes until noon. In 5 minutes, the royal family would step onto the balcony, and Marcus was convinced they would be walking into a trap. He had a choice to make. He could obey orders, report to the command center, and hope that he was wrong about the threat. Or he could trust his observations and training, ignore his orders, and try to stop the attack himself. Marcus thought about all the times he had been mocked and dismissed by his fellow guards. He thought about Captain Williams' words about proving himself in a real situation. He thought about Private Michael Chun, the small guard from an earlier generation who had prevented a catastrophe through exceptional observational skills and marksmanship. Most of all, he thought about the royal family, King Edward, Queen Isabella, and Princess Catherine, who in 5 minutes would be trusting their lives to the protection of the royal guard. Marcus might be the smallest and weakest member of the unit, but he was still a royal guard, and he had sworn an oath to protect them with his life. Marcus turned off his radio, slipped his rifle from its shoulder sling, and began moving toward the clock tower. If there was a sniper waiting there, Marcus was going to find him, and, if necessary, he was going to stop him. As he pushed through the crowd, Marcus felt a calm determination settling over him. This was the moment Captain Williams had talked about, the chance to prove that he belonged in the Royal Guard despite his limitations. Whether he succeeded or failed, Marcus was finally going to show everyone exactly what he was capable of. The clock tower loomed ahead of him, its ancient stones and modern scaffolding creating a maze of potential hiding places. Somewhere in that structure, Marcus was certain a killer was preparing to change the course of history. But Marcus Thompson, the royal guard that everyone had underestimated, was about to spoil those plans. Marcus approached the clock tower with his heart pounding, but his mind clear and focused. The massive structure rose nearly 200 feet above the square, its Gothic architecture and ancient stonework making it one of the most prominent buildings in the capital. The renovation scaffolding that covered the upper levels created a perfect maze of hiding spots and shooting positions. As he reached the base of the tower, Marcus could hear the distant sound of trumpets announcing the royal family's approach to the balcony. He had perhaps 3 minutes before King Edward, Queen Isabella, and Princess Catherine would be exposed to whatever threat was waiting above him. The main entrance to the clock tower was supposed to be sealed for the renovation work, but Marcus found that the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar. Someone had definitely been here recently. He slipped inside, his rifle ready, and found himself in a dusty stairwell that spiraled upward into the shadows. The interior of the tower was a maze of construction equipment, plastic sheeting, and renovation supplies. Marcus moved as quietly as possible, using his training to minimize noise while maintaining speed. Every few steps, he paused to listen for any sound that might indicate the presence of others. As he climbed, Marcus could hear the crowd outside growing louder and more excited. The royal family had appeared on the balcony, and the traditional ceremony was beginning. King Edward's voice carried faintly through the stone walls as he delivered the opening words of the Harvest Festival address. Marcus reached the first major landing and found evidence that confirmed his worst fears. Fresh footprints in the construction dust, cigarette butts that were still warm, and, most tellingly, a small piece of paper with handwritten notes about wind speed and distance calculations. Someone had definitely been using this tower as an observation post. He keyed his radio one more time, hoping that someone would listen now that he had concrete proof. But the radio produced only static. The thick stone walls of the tower were blocking his signal. Marcus was completely on his own. Continuing upward, Marcus began to hear voices from somewhere above him. They were speaking quietly, but in the echoing chamber of the tower's stairwell, even whispers carried. He couldn't make out specific words, but he could tell that at least two people were present, and they sounded focused and professional. Marcus slowed his ascent and began moving with even greater care. He was now in the most dangerous phase of his mission, approaching armed individuals who were prepared for violence. His advantage lay in surprise and his knowledge that they were there, but that advantage would disappear the moment he was discovered. The voices became clearer as he climbed higher. Marcus could now make out two distinct speakers, one with a local accent, the other with what sounded like a foreign inflection. They were discussing timing and positioning in the calm, professional manner of experienced soldiers. Target is in position. Wind is negligible. Range is confirmed at 380 meters. Extraction vehicle is standing by. Local assets are ready to create confusion after the shot. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. This wasn't just a lone gunman. It was a coordinated assassination plot involving multiple participants and a planned escape route. The local assets were presumably the suspicious individuals Marcus had observed in the crowd, positioned to create chaos and help the shooters escape in the confusion following the attack. He reached another landing and found himself facing a choice of directions. The main stairwell continued upward toward the clock mechanism, but a newer wooden staircase led to the scaffolding levels where the renovation work was taking place. The voices were coming from the scaffolding area. Marcus chose the wooden stairs, moving even more carefully now. The construction materials created both cover and potential noise hazards. One wrong step on a loose board or piece of equipment could alert the assassins to his presence. As he climbed, Marcus could hear King Edward's speech continuing from the balcony below. The king was discussing the importance of tradition and community, completely unaware that a sniper's crosshairs might already be centered on his chest. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical force. The voices above him suddenly stopped, and Marcus froze on the staircase. Had they heard him? Were they repositioning? He waited in absolute silence for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then the conversation resumed, and Marcus realized they had simply been listening to something on their radio communication system. Confirmed, target is in optimal position, wind conditions are stable, take the shot on my signal. Marcus was running out of time. The assassins were in final preparation mode, and the attack could begin at any moment. He forced himself to move faster, accepting the increased risk of making noise in exchange for reaching them before they could complete their mission. He reached the top of the wooden staircase and found himself on a platform that connected to the scaffolding system. Through gaps in the plastic sheeting that covered the work area, Marcus could see the palace balcony clearly. The royal family was perfectly visible, with King Edward at the podium, Queen Isabella beside him, and Princess Catherine slightly behind them, all completely exposed to anyone with a clear line of sight. Marcus crept forward along the scaffolding, using the construction materials as cover. The voices were very close now, just around a corner of the platform. He could smell cigarette smoke and gun oil, and he could hear the distinctive sound of a precision rifle being adjusted and prepared. Final check complete. Target acquisition confirmed. Standing by for green light. Marcus knew he was out of time. The shooters were ready, and the order to fire could come at any second. He had to act immediately, but he was facing at least 2 armed professionals who would be alert and ready for trouble. His only advantages were surprise and his superior knowledge of the tower layout from his pre-festival reconnaissance. Marcus made his decision. Instead of trying to sneak closer and risk being discovered, he would use his marksmanship skills to engage the assassins from his current position. It wasn't ideal. The range was short, the lighting was poor, and he would have to shoot through construction materials, but it was his best option given the circumstances. He moved to a position where he could see through a gap in the plastic sheeting and slowly raised his rifle. What he saw made his heart race with urgency. 2 men in dark clothing were positioned behind a sniper rifle mounted on a bipod. The rifle was aimed directly at the palace balcony, and one man was looking through the scope while the other observed through binoculars and maintained radio contact. Taking aim, target is centered, wind is negligible, ready for final authorization. Marcus could see that the sniper had his finger on the trigger and was simply waiting for the command to fire. There was no time for warnings, no time for attempts to arrest them, no time for backup to arrive. If Marcus was going to save the royal family, he had to shoot first and ask questions later. But as Marcus settled into his firing position, he faced a terrible realization. Shooting at the assassins from his current angle meant that any missed shots could potentially continue toward the palace balcony and endanger the very people he was trying to protect. The range was short enough that overpenetration was a real possibility, and Marcus couldn't risk hitting innocent targets. He needed a better position, one that would allow him to shoot at the assassins without any possibility of his bullets traveling toward the royal family. But moving to a better position would take time that he didn't have, and would almost certainly alert the assassins to his presence. Marcus studied the situation with the analytical mind that made him such an exceptional marksman. The scaffolding system offered multiple levels and angles of approach. If he could get above the assassins, he could shoot down at them with the stone floor of the tower as a backstop. It would be the safest option for everyone except Marcus himself. The radio traffic from the assassins indicated that they were still waiting for final authorization. Someone else was controlling the timing of the attack, which meant Marcus might have a few more seconds to reposition. He began moving upward through the scaffolding system, climbing as quickly and quietly as possible. As he climbed, Marcus could hear the king's speech reaching its climax. The traditional blessing was about to begin, which would require all 3 members of the royal family to stand together at the front of the balcony in perfect view of any sniper. If the attack was going to happen, it would be in the next minute or two. Marcus reached a higher level of scaffolding that put him approximately 20 feet above the assassins. From this angle, he had a clear view of both men and a safe shooting background. More importantly, he could see that the sniper was making final adjustments to his rifle and appeared ready to fire immediately upon receiving authorization. Target is optimally positioned for multiple hits. Recommend immediate execution. Marcus heard the words clearly and realized that the assassins weren't just planning to kill the king. They intended to shoot all 3 members of the royal family. The scope of the attack was even worse than he had imagined. Marcus settled into a stable shooting position on the scaffolding platform, using a construction beam as a rest for his rifle. The range was approximately 60 feet, close enough that accuracy wouldn't be an issue, but far enough that he would need to be careful about shot placement to ensure immediate incapacitation of both targets. Through his rifle scope, Marcus could see every detail of the scene below him. The primary sniper was a man in his 30s with dark hair and the steady hands of a professional killer. His spotter was older, probably in his 40s with the bearing of someone with military experience. Both men were completely focused on their target and had no idea that they were being watched. Marcus made his final calculations. Wind was not a factor at this range. The angle was steep, but manageable. The most important consideration was the sequence of shots. He would need to incapacitate the primary sniper first, then immediately engage the spotter before he could radio a warning or attempt to complete the assassination himself. Authorization received, taking the shot in 3. Marcus didn't wait for one. As soon as he heard the countdown begin, he pulled the trigger. The shot rang out in the confined space of the tower like a thunderclap. Through his scope, Marcus saw the primary sniper jerk and fall sideways, his rifle clattering onto the scaffolding platform. The spotter spun around, trying to locate the source of the gunfire, his hand reaching for a sidearm. Marcus worked the bolt of his rifle smoothly and fired a second shot before the spotter could draw his weapon or raise an alarm. The man collapsed beside his partner, and suddenly, the tower was silent except for the distant sound of the king's continuing speech from the balcony below. Marcus remained in position for several more seconds, watching for any movement from the two assassins. When he was satisfied that both men were incapacitated, he carefully climbed down to their level to secure their weapons and check for additional threats. Both men were unconscious, but alive. Marcus had aimed for non-lethal incapacitation rather than killing shots. Their rifle was a high-end precision weapon with a scope that would have made the assassination attempt almost certain to succeed. Radio equipment scattered around their position confirmed that they were part of a larger coordinated effort. Marcus quickly secured their weapons and tried his radio again. This time, with the obstruction of the tower's higher levels behind him, he was able to get a clear signal. "Control, this is Thompson. I have neutralized 2 armed individuals in the clock tower who are preparing to attack the royal family. Request immediate backup and medical assistance. Also be advised that there are additional hostile personnel in the crowd below as part of a coordinated assault." The response was immediate and frantic. "Thompson, confirm your last transmission. Did you say you've engaged hostiles?" "Confirmed. 2 shooters neutralized in the clock tower. Both are alive but unconscious. I have secured their weapons and equipment. The royal family is safe, but there are additional threats in the crowd that need to be addressed immediately." Marcus could hear the explosion of activity in the background as the security command center finally understood that the threat he had been reporting was real and immediate. Within minutes, the sound of boots on the tower stairs indicated that backup was on the way. But Marcus remained at his post, rifle ready, watching over the palace balcony where the royal family continued their traditional ceremony, still unaware of how close they had come to disaster. The smallest and most underestimated member of the royal guard had just prevented an assassination that could have changed the course of the kingdom's history. As the first backup guards reached his position, Marcus finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. He had trusted his instincts, ignored the dismissive voices of those who doubted him, and used his unique skills to protect the people he had sworn to serve. The mocking voices that had followed him throughout his career suddenly seemed very far away. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that would forever change Marcus Thompson's life and reputation. Within minutes of his radio call, the clock tower was swarming with royal guards, intelligence officers, medical personnel, and senior palace officials. The 2 unconscious assassins were quickly taken into custody and rushed to the palace medical facility under heavy guard. Captain Williams was among the first to reach Marcus's position, her face a mixture of relief, concern, and something that looked remarkably like pride. She found Marcus still at his post, rifle ready, watching over the palace balcony where the royal family continued their ceremony, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. "Thompson," she said, her voice unusually soft. "Report." Marcus lowered his rifle and turned to face his captain. 2 armed individuals were preparing to assassinate the royal family from this position. I observed them conducting final preparations, and heard them receive authorization to proceed with the attack. I engaged both targets with non-lethal precision shots to prevent the assassination. Captain Williams looked at the captured rifle and radio equipment scattered around the scaffolding platform. How long had they been in position? Based on the evidence I found during my ascent, at least several hours, possibly since early this morning. They had detailed information about distances, wind conditions, and timing. This was a professional operation with significant planning behind it. And the additional threats you mentioned in the crowd. Marcus provided detailed descriptions of the suspicious individuals he had been tracking throughout the morning, including their positions and apparent coordination with the sniper team. They appear to be part of a larger network designed to create confusion and facilitate escape after the assassination. Captain Williams immediately radioed this information to the crowd security teams. Within minutes, reports began coming back that several of the individuals Marcus had described were being taken into custody. Each arrest yielded more evidence of the coordinated plot. As the immediate crisis wound down, Captain Williams studied Marcus with new eyes. "Thompson, you disobeyed direct orders to report to the command center. You ignored repeated instructions to stay focused on your patrol duties. You operated completely outside the established chain of command." Marcus felt his heart sink. Even after preventing an assassination, he was going to be disciplined for insubordination. "Yes, ma'am. I understand. Thompson, you've been struggling in this unit because we've been trying to make you into something you're not. We've been focused on your weaknesses instead of recognizing your strengths." She turned back to him. "What you did today wasn't just good marksmanship. It was exceptional tactical thinking, superior observational skills, and the courage to act on your convictions even when everyone around you doubted your judgment. Those are the qualities of an elite royal guard." Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the adrenaline of combat. For the first time since joining the unit, someone was recognizing his value as a protector rather than focusing on his limitations. "There will be an extensive investigation into this incident," Captain Williams continued. "You'll need to provide detailed statements to multiple agencies. The press will eventually learn about what happened, and there will be significant attention focused on your actions." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. His quiet life as an overlooked member of the Royal Guard was about to end permanently. "But first," Captain Williams said with something that might have been a smile, "we need to complete our primary mission. The royal family is still conducting their ceremony, and they still need our protection." As if summoned by her words, the radio crackled with an urgent message. All units, this is command. The royal family has been briefed on the security situation and wishes to complete the ceremony as scheduled. They specifically request that the guard who prevented the attack remain on overwatch duty until the conclusion of the festival address. Captain Williams looked at Marcus with raised eyebrows. "It seems the royal family has heard about your actions and wants you to continue protecting them personally." Marcus felt a surge of pride and responsibility unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Yes, ma'am. I'll maintain overwatch until they're safely inside the palace." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus remained at his post in the clock tower, rifle ready, scanning the crowd and surrounding buildings for any sign of additional threats. From his elevated position, he had a perfect view of the palace balcony where King Edward, Queen Isabella, and Princess Catherine completed their traditional blessing ceremony. But now Marcus saw the scene differently. These weren't distant figures performing a ceremonial duty. They were real people whose lives had been in immediate danger, people he had personally protected from harm. The weight of that responsibility was both humbling and empowering. As the ceremony concluded and the royal family waved to the cheering crowd before retreating safely into the palace, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. This was what he had joined the Royal Guard to do. Not to march in parades or stand at attention during state dinners, but to be the guardian who stood between the kingdom's most important people and those who would do them harm. The radio crackled again. "Thompson, this is command. The royal family is secure. Report to Captain Williams for debriefing. Marcus shouldered his rifle and began making his way down from the tower. As he descended the stone stairs, he thought about how different this journey was from his climb up just hours earlier. Then, he had been a desperate young guard trying to prove himself worthy of his uniform. Now, he was a royal guard who had demonstrated his value in the most dramatic way possible. When Marcus emerged from the clock tower, he was surprised to find a crowd of his fellow guards waiting for him. These were the same men and women who had mocked his size, questioned his abilities, and dismissed him as the weak link in the unit. But now their faces showed a mixture of respect, amazement, and something approaching awe. Derek Harrison, the massive guard who had been Marcus's most persistent tormentor, stepped forward from the group. For a moment, Marcus tensed, expecting another confrontation. But instead of mockery, Derek's expression was serious and respectful. "Thompson," Derek said, his voice lacking its usual sarcastic edge. "We heard what you did up there. We heard how you saved them." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond. "I just did my job." "No," Derek said firmly. "You did something more than that. You saw something the rest of us missed. You trusted your instincts when everyone else told you to ignore them. And you put your life on the line to protect people who didn't even know they were in danger." Derek extended his hand. "I owe you an apology. We all do. I spent so much time focusing on what you couldn't do that I never paid attention to what you could do better than any of us." Marcus shook Derek's hand, feeling the strength in the bigger man's grip, but also sensing genuine respect for the first time. Around them, other guards nodded in agreement, their earlier dismissive attitudes replaced by newfound appreciation for their colleagues' unique abilities. "How did you know?" asked Sarah Martinez, one of the female guards who had always been professionally polite but distant. "How did you see the threat when our intelligence officers missed it?" Marcus thought about the question carefully before answering. "I think it's because I've always had to pay attention to details that others might miss. When you're smaller and weaker than everyone around you, you learn to notice things that stronger people can afford to ignore." "It's more than that," said another guard. "You understood the tactical situation better than any of us. You analyzed the threat, identified the most likely attack vector, and positioned yourself to respond effectively. That's not just attention to detail. That's strategic thinking." Captain Williams approached the group, and the assembled guards immediately came to attention. "At ease," she said. "Thompson with me. The rest of you, return to your duties. We still have a festival to secure." As Marcus walked with Captain Williams toward the palace, she spoke quietly. "The royal family wants to meet you personally. They've requested a private audience to express their gratitude for your actions." Marcus felt his stomach flutter with nervousness. "I'm not sure what to say to them, ma'am." "Be yourself, Thompson. That's what saved their lives today." They entered the palace through the main entrance, walking down the same corridors Marcus had passed through countless times during his routine duties. But today, everything felt different. The portraits of former royal guards that lined the walls no longer seemed like reminders of his own inadequacy. Instead, they looked like colleagues, protectors who had also stood ready to sacrifice everything for the safety of the royal family. As they approached the royal apartments, Marcus caught a glimpse of himself in one of the ornate mirrors that decorated the hallway. He still looked like the same young man who had been mocked by his peers just hours earlier. Small, slight, more suited to academic pursuits than physical confrontation. But there was something different in his eyes now, a confidence and sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. "Captain Williams," Marcus said as they paused outside the royal receiving room. "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself. I know you could have transferred me to gate duty or removed me from the unit entirely." "Thompson," she replied, "I want you to understand something. Today didn't prove that you belong in the Royal Guard. Today proved that you're one of the most valuable members of this unit. There's a difference." The doors to the receiving room opened, and Marcus found himself face to face with the three people whose lives he had saved. King Edward, Queen Isabella, and Princess Catherine stood, waiting to meet the young guard who had prevented their assassination. For Marcus Thompson, the smallest and most underestimated member of the Royal Guard, This moment represented the complete transformation of his life and career. But more importantly, it represented the recognition that true strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes were exactly what the world needed. The royal receiving room was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, despite having served in the palace for months. Golden tapestries covered the walls, depicting scenes from the kingdom's history, and crystal chandeliers cast warm light throughout the spacious chamber. Ancient furniture, polished to perfection, created intimate conversation areas within the grand space. King Edward stood near the fireplace, a man in his late 50s with graying temples and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail. Queen Isabella, elegant in her royal blue dress, sat on a velvet chair with a poise that came from a lifetime of public service. Princess Catherine, barely 18 years old with her mother's grace and her father's sharp intellect, stood beside the window, looking out toward the square where thousands of citizens continued their festival celebration, completely unaware of how close they had come to witnessing a tragedy. "Your Majesty," Captain Williams said with a formal bow, "may I present Guard Thompson, who prevented the attack on your family this morning." Marcus followed the captain's lead, bowing deeply before the royal family. His heart was racing, but not from fear of combat this time, from the surreal realization that he was standing before the three people whose lives he had saved. "Rise, please," King Edward said, his voice carrying the warm authority that had made him beloved by his subjects. "Guard Thompson, we owe you a debt that can never fully be repaid." "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he had expected, "I was simply doing my duty as a member of the Royal Guard." Queen Isabella rose from her chair and approached Marcus with a gentle smile. "No, young man, what you did today went far beyond duty. You risked your life to protect ours, and you did so when others doubted your concerns. I understand that your warnings were initially dismissed by our security apparatus," King Edward added, his expression growing serious. "That failure in our system nearly cost us everything. Your persistence and courage in pursuing the threat despite official disbelief showed exceptional judgment and dedication." Princess Catherine turned from the window to face Marcus directly. "How did you know to look in the clock tower?" Our intelligence officers had supposedly cleared all the buildings around the square. Marcus chose his words carefully, not wanting to criticize the security establishment, but needing to explain his reasoning. "Your Highness, I spent considerable time before the festival studying potential threat positions. The clock tower offered several advantages for a sniper: height, multiple firing positions due to the scaffolding, and it was just outside the main security perimeter. But more than that," King Edward observed, "you identified suspicious behavior in the crowd that others missed. You recognized the coordination between multiple threats when our trained officers saw only individual festival attendees. I believe my perspective was different, Your Majesty. Being smaller and less physically imposing than my colleagues, I've learned to notice details that others might overlook. When you can't rely on physical presence to deter threats, you develop other skills to compensate." Queen Isabella exchanged a meaningful look with her husband. "Captain Williams has told us about the challenges you've faced within the Royal Guard unit. It seems that what others perceived as weaknesses were actually your greatest strengths." Marcus felt a moment of embarrassment, realizing that his struggles had been discussed at the highest levels of the kingdom. "Your Majesty, I hope my difficulties haven't reflected poorly on the Royal Guard as a whole. Captain Williams and the other guards are exceptionally dedicated professionals." "On the contrary," King Edward said firmly, "your situation has highlighted areas where our selection and evaluation processes need improvement. We have been too focused on traditional measures of strength and have not adequately valued the analytical and observational skills that prove crucial today." Princess Catherine stepped closer to Marcus, her expression earnest and curious. "What was it like up there in the tower, when you realized you were the only thing standing between the assassins and our family?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Honestly, Your Highness, I was terrified, not of the physical danger, but of the possibility that I might fail. The responsibility of protecting your family is something every royal guard carries, but in that moment, it became very personal and immediate. Yet you didn't hesitate, King Edward observed. When a moment came to act, you performed with exceptional skill and courage. The training took over, Your Majesty. Captain Williams and the other instructors prepared us for exactly this type of situation. When I saw the threat clearly, there was really only one choice to make. Queen Isabella moved to a small table where refreshments had been prepared. Please, sit with us for a moment. We rarely have the opportunity to speak personally with the guards who protect us, and today's events have reminded us how important it is to know the people who stand ready to sacrifice for our safety. Marcus accepted the offered seat, still somewhat overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation. Just hours ago, he had been the overlooked member of the Royal Guard, and now he was having tea with the royal family in their private chambers. Tell us about yourself, Marcus, Princess Catherine said, using his first name with the easy familiarity of youth. What brought you to the Royal Guard? Marcus found himself relaxing slightly as he shared his background. His childhood in a small town outside the capital, his fascination with precision shooting, his desire to serve his country in a meaningful way. The royal family listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and making him feel like his story mattered. I've always admired the Royal Guard from a distance, Marcus explained. When I was young, I would watch the changing of the guard ceremonies and imagine what it would be like to be trusted with protecting the most important people in the kingdom. When I qualified for the academy, it felt like a dream come true. And then reality set in, Queen Isabella said with understanding. It couldn't have been easy being the smallest member of such an elite unit. No, Your Majesty, it wasn't. There were times when I wondered if I had made a mistake, if I was really suited for this type of service. But I also knew that I had skills that could contribute to the mission, even if they weren't the traditional skills that most people associated with the Royal Guard. King Edward leaned forward in his chair. Marcus, I want you to understand something important. What happened today wasn't just about good marksmanship or keen observation. It was about moral courage. The willingness to do what was right even when authority figures were telling you to stop, even when your peers dismissed your concerns. That kind of courage is rare, Princess Catherine added. It's the difference between someone who follows orders and someone who takes responsibility for the larger mission. Captain Williams, who had remained quietly in the background during the conversation, stepped forward. Your Majesties, if I may, I'd like to discuss how this incident will affect Guard Thompson's future assignments and responsibilities. Of course, King Edward said. We've already discussed this matter with the head of palace security. Guard Thompson's actions today have demonstrated capabilities that we believe should be utilized more effectively. Queen Isabella smiled at Marcus. We're creating a new position within the Royal Guard, Senior Protection Analyst. It will combine traditional guard duties with advanced threat assessment and tactical planning responsibilities. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for such a position. You're the most qualified person in the kingdom, Princess Catherine said with conviction. You've proven that you can see threats that others miss, think strategically under pressure, and act decisively when lives are at stake. King Edward stood up, and the others followed suit. Marcus, you saved our lives today, but more than that, you've shown us the importance of valuing different types of strength and intelligence within our security apparatus. Your new role will ensure that we never again overlook the kind of threat you identified today. The position comes with increased authority to investigate security concerns, direct access to intelligence assessments, and the responsibility to train other guards in advanced observational and analytical techniques, Captain Williams explained. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. I accept the position, Your Majesties, and I pledge to continue serving with the same dedication I've shown today. We have no doubt that you will, Queen Isabella said warmly. As the formal audience concluded, Princess Catherine approached Marcus one final time. There's something else I want you to know. Word of what you did today is already spreading throughout the palace staff and the government. You've become a symbol of how individual courage and intelligence can triumph over seemingly impossible odds. More importantly, King Edward added, you've reminded everyone that true strength comes in many forms, and that the most valuable people are often those who don't fit traditional expectations. As Marcus left the royal apartments and walked back through the palace corridors, he reflected on how completely his life had changed in the span of a single day. The morning had begun with him facing possible dismissal from the royal guard for being too small and weak to serve effectively. It was ending with him being promoted to a specially created position that would utilize his unique skills to better protect the royal family. But the most significant change wasn't in his official status or responsibilities. It was in how he viewed himself and his place in the world. For the first time since joining the royal guard, Marcus felt that he truly belonged, not despite his differences from his colleagues, but because of them. When Marcus returned to the royal guard barracks that evening, he found that word of his promotion and the day's events had already spread throughout the unit. The atmosphere was completely different from what he had experienced that morning. Guards who had previously ignored him now sought him out to offer congratulations and ask about his experiences. Derek Harrison, his former tormentor, approached him with genuine respect and interest in learning from his analytical techniques. Thompson, Derek said, I've been thinking about what happened today. You saw things that all of us missed, including the officers with years more experience. I'd like to understand how you developed those observational skills. Marcus realized that his colleagues weren't just being polite. They genuinely wanted to learn from him. For the first time in his career, he was being viewed as a resource rather than a burden. It started with necessity. Marcus explained to the group of guards that had gathered around him. When you can't intimidate threats through physical presence, you learn to identify them through other means. You pay attention to body language, coordination between individuals, inconsistencies in behavior. Over the following hours, Marcus found himself teaching impromptu lessons on threat assessment and tactical analysis. His colleagues listened with the attention they had previously reserved for combat instructors and senior officers. Marcus realized that he was finally contributing to the unit in the way he had always hoped, by sharing knowledge and skills that made everyone more effective at their mission. As the evening wound down and the barracks grew quiet, Marcus sat on his bed and thought about Private Michael Chun, the small royal guard from a previous generation whose story had inspired him. He wondered if Chun had ever experienced a day like this one, a moment when all of his struggles and doubts crystallized into a single opportunity to prove his worth. Marcus looked at his new assignment papers, outlining his responsibilities as senior protection analyst. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to serve the royal family, but tonight he simply felt grateful for the chance to be exactly who he was meant to be. The young man who had been mocked for his size and doubted for his abilities had proven that sometimes the most unlikely heroes were exactly what the kingdom needed. And in doing so, he had not only saved lives, but also opened the door for others who didn't fit the traditional mold of what a protector should look like. Marcus Thompson had found his place in the Royal Guard, and the Royal Guard had discovered that true strength could never be measured by physical size alone.